And now we'll go now to a Senate courtyard for a doorstop.
Don't know. I represent the northern part of the Galilee Basin. More coal will be coming out of the Galilee Basin than the whole of Queensland put together. So this will almost double Australia's coal production. The three stakeholders are Gina Rinehart, Clive Palmer and the Indian company Adani. All three have said that they will be mining with fly-in foreign workers. There'll be 40,000 jobs at the very least just in the Galilee Basin. I'm not talking about the rest of the coalfields in Queensland or Western Australia. So we're talking undoubtedly here about over 100,000 jobs. Now these are the plum jobs in this country. The wages range from 85,000, very few people are under 100,000, from 85,000 to 176,000. Now, Clive Palmer's company is called China First. I'm told he represents Chinese money. I'm told that Gina Rinehart represents Chinese money. It's for her to come forward and say she doesn't. Now, not unnaturally, Chinese and Indian people naturally would like their own people to get the jobs here. The concept being put here is that these plum jobs will be available for foreigners. They will not be available for Australians. And there is not the slightest doubt in my mind that this is about undermining the awards in this country and undermining our conditions of work in this country by a very supine workforce which will work under a master-servant relationship rather than the industrial awards which this country has fought hard for and can be proud of, under which we've worked for the last 120 years. This is the most fundamental change in the Australian society that we've seen in recent, in 100 years probably. Now the other thing I want to say, finally, before I hand over to Andrew, and I must emphasise that the Greens have already had a press conference and that Senator Madigan is in Melbourne, so he can't be here, has given me a statement of support to be read out today. And Nick Xenophon is trapped in estimates and he puts in his apologies and also states his opposition to fly-in foreign workers. But the final thing I want to say before I hand over to my colleague is that there are 673,000 people registered for part-time work in Queensland. There are 202,000 that are unemployed in Queensland. Now, of those two figures, there are 299,000 people in Queensland that are registered seeking full-time employment that can't get it. And what? We can't get 7,000 workers for the next 5 years on the Galilee Basin. I mean, it is an insult to our intelligence to say they can't get workers in Queensland. That is an insult to our intelligence, and it would be a similar situation in Western Australia. Clearly, this has got nothing to do with that. This is about, when we've had discussions with the big mining companies, smash unionism, bring in foreign workers. That's their message to the Australian people. I'm going to say no more. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andrew Wilkie.
Thank you, Bob. And look, I'll be brief. I was pleased to second the Australian Greens bill because I agree with Adam Bandt that we should give Australian workers some sort of legislated protection. I too am concerned that these enterprise migration agreements are nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to replace Australian workers with lower paid foreign workers. Now, that would be unacceptable. I mean, the fact is, though, that there may well be gaps in the Australian workforce, but it's only genuine gaps should be filled by foreign workers. And, over the last couple of days, there seems to be an element of policy on the run by the government here. I am yet to be persuaded that the government has intends to create any sort of effective organisation that would test the claims by the mining companies. You know, the mining companies say they cannot find workers and they will need to enter into these enterprise migration agreements. But, you know, for heaven's sakes, we might have a relatively low unemployment rate in Australia of a little under 5%, but we have an underemployment rate of over 7%, and in my home state of Tasmania we have an unemployment rate of over 8%. I think that the government needs to have a process and an organisation in place that can reliably test the claims by the mining industry that they even need to enter into these enterprise migration agreements. Because, you know, I am worried that this is a move by stealth by the mining industry, ultimately to reduce their cost of production by bringing in foreign workers, paying them half what they pay Australian workers. You know, while we've got people sitting on, sitting looking for work, and that would be unacceptable. That is not good public policy, and it's not in the public interest.
Mr. Wilkie, isn't there terms under the EMAs to make sure that these workers are paid the same wages and conditions as Australian workers?
Well, look, I'm worried this is the start of a slippery slope. You know, this very first EMA entered into with Gina Rinehart's organisation, there may well be, you know, great care by the industry to do the right thing and to ensure those foreign workers are paid every bit of the Australian entitlement. But, you know, we need to be very, very careful where this takes us. You know, when we start getting more and more foreign workers, more and more EMAs agreed to, I would not be at all surprised if there's a push by the industry to water down those awards. And ultimately, I mean, Gina Rinehart herself, in a poem she talked about special economic zones in Northern Australia. It is clearly the view of some people in the industry that they can not simply meet their labour force requirements, but they can drive down their price of production.
And Mr. Katter, are you persuaded of the merits?
You'll have to speak up.
Are you persuaded of the
sinus? Yeah.
Are you persuaded of the merits or the effectiveness of the Jobs Board, which has been linked to the EMAs, which is supposed to ensure that there's a genuine efforts made to ensure Australian workers are employed on these projects?
I just repeat. There are 299,000 people in Queensland that are desperately chasing full-time employment. 299,000. And they're saying to us that they need to bring it, even if they were paying the same award. And I mean, would there be anyone here seriously believing they'd be paying the same award and conditions? I mean, why would they want to bring them in if they were? I mean, of course they won't. But even if they were, why should a foreigner get that job instead of a Queenslander get that job, or a West Australian? And when Gina Rinehart made the statement, that afternoon and the next morning, we collected 9 names of people that had been 6 months chasing work. One bloke was selling his motorbike because he couldn't go any longer without it. 9 people just that afternoon and the next morning. We just happened to run into, in our travels, people that were desperately chasing work in the mining fields and couldn't get it. I mean, it's an insult to our intelligence. But it's a choice of whether you give this the most plum and highly paid jobs in this country to a foreigner, or whether you give this job to an Australian. Of growth in mining.
All right, for some reason we appear to be having trouble with that line to Canberra, but I guess for now that's where we'll leave that media conference with Andrew Wilkie and Bob Katter speaking about the situation that exists in fly-in, fly-out workers in some Queensland and Western Australian towns particularly.